Hello and come on in, everyone. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on our second session in our SREB Open Educational Resources 2023 webinar series. This webinar will be recorded. Here's my contact information here at SREB for future reference. SREB's Open Educational Resources, we are funded by a grant from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation in collaboration with the 3 other regional education compacts to form what is known as the National Consortium of Open Educational Resources, or NCOER. For more information, please visit the website at mec.org Creative Commons for 15% discounts on Creative Commons licensing for members of the compacts. As we conduct the webinar today, please type your questions into the Q&A window and they'll be answered in the order in which they were received. Thank you again for attending this webinar. Today we are joined by Amy Evans-Godwin and Reg Lichty, and they're going to take us through how OER can support digital equity in your state. I will be brief, and now I'm going to turn the webinar over to them. And please remember to add your questions to the chat or preferably in the Q&A, and they'll be answered in the order in which they were received. Amy, Reg?
Thank you, Charlotte. Well, Reg is bringing up our slides. If folks are comfortable introducing yourself in the chat to say where you're from geographically or any agency or institution that you're affiliated with, we're always interested to see who has joined us. So welcome, everyone. I'll start off the introductions. I'm Amy Evans-Godwin at ISKME, and ISKME is a California-based global nonprofit in education, and we specialize in open education and digital libraries for curriculum from around the world. Our mission is to work towards making learning experiences more open, participatory, and equitable. And I've been with ISKME now for 17 years, and part of my work is in facilitating networks and communities of practice, including the Go Open network that you'll hear more about today. I'll hand it to Reg.
Oh, thanks so much, Amy, and thank you, Charlotte, for teeing us up today. And just a big welcome to everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm Reg Lichty. I'm the co-founder of Foresight Law and Policy. We are a small education policy focused law firm working across the preschool to workforce continuum all across the United States with a focus on work here in Washington, D.C. We're thrilled to be here with you today and to be a longtime partner of the Go Open team in helping the community really understand how to use OER to help students. So excited to get underway. Just double checking if anybody wants to just drop your name and organization into the chat, as Amy said, as we go along. Please do so. We're excited to have both a presentation for you today, but also an opportunity for Q&A, both at the end of the session, but also kind of throughout our presentations. We'll be keeping close watch on the chat bar for any questions you want to submit that way. And if you'd rather talk about your questions and ideas at the end of the presentation, that would be just fine too. So we are poised to talk with you about some policy ideas that we think have really kind of broad application to states' education and workforce policy sets. But today we're going to focus all of our discussion and ideas around the really important work that every state has underway in 2023, focused on promoting digital equity. And we want to start a little bit of framing around that work because we think it will be helpful for those of you that really want to take these ideas and advocate for them in your states. So all of this started as a result, this digital equity work that's underway as a result of the bipartisan infrastructure law that Congress approved in November of 2021. If you have followed the law at all, that's called the Infrastructure Improvement and Jobs Act. And not only did it include a lot of focus on, when you think of infrastructure around roads and bridges and those kinds of things, it includes an historic investment in broadband. We are fortunate that Congress, in making that investment in the networks that deliver high capacity broadband to our communities, including our students, they also said we really need to make an investment in ensuring that all communities, and especially our most vulnerable communities, have an opportunity to take advantage of these new networks as they're built out. And as a result of that, Congress said, we're going to provide money to every state by formula to write digital equity plans in 2023. Every state, a lot of territories, a lot of tribal groups took advantage of those funds, and they have been working over the last kind of many months to develop plans that really aim to boost broadband adoption, but especially through the lens of how broadband can help support education and workforce development. So it provides a really awesome opportunity for the Go Open network and for educators and leaders like you to tell this story about how openly licensed materials can be a pathway for ensuring that high quality educational resources are available to students of all ages that are trying to take advantage of digital learning. And just in the last couple of days, President Biden and Vice President Harris announced the amounts of funding that every state will receive by formula through the BEAD program, which is the direct investment in these broadband networks that have to focus on underconnected and unconnected communities. So this is really a chance to finally really ensure that every corner of the country has access to these networks. So these plans around digital equity are vitally important. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about how you can tell the OER story in this context. So just briefly turning back to the infrastructure law for one more minute, there are really three elements that we are concerned about as OER kind of voices, as OER champions. The first is the State Digital Equity Planning Grant, which I mentioned. So every state has those funds, and as set up a process for writing plans in 2023. They will, and some have already begun to publish those plans for public comment. And if you go to the National Telecommunications and Information Administration's website and type in digital equity, you'll find a lot of information about the state planning process, including they are publishing the state draft plans as they come out. So you can look to see if your state plan has been published. After a state's plan is submitted and approved by NTIA later this year, they're going to receive some implementation funds by formula. That element's called the Digital Equity Capacity Building Grant Program. And then there's a third grant, there's a third prong to this policy. Digital equity competitive grants will also eventually be announced. The competition will be announced later this year, and there'll be an opportunity for school districts, for state education agencies, for other community groups working in OER to seek out funding from NTIA to do some of this digital equity work, independent of the formula funds that every state will get. So we see the ideas we're going to share today on the policy side for OER really aligning well with the plans, with the implementation of those plans and the competitive grants. So just wanted to start with that framing. So now I'm going to pivot to Amy, just for those of you that are new to OER, to talk a little bit about what it is.
Thanks, Reg. This work has been a way for us to address some of the gaps between what's normally thought of as digital equity, as Reg is discussing the infrastructure, and where we could see benefit to connect to OER as a solution within this larger framework. And if you're new to OER, I see some names I recognize amongst the attendees, but there's always folks that come to this work new, and a lot of this movement had been, the springboard had been copyright, to use open licensing for materials to be used by anyone. So teaching and learning materials can be courseware, lesson plans, videos, labs, any type of materials that are either in the public domain or released under an open license like Creative Commons, that you can use and reuse and redistribute, change and share without having to ask special permission. Go to the next. And why is this important? There are many benefits for OER that make OER a really positive solution for both learners and educators. And they fall into these buckets. OER was really guided from the beginning around equity, that everyone must have the right to access and use high quality materials. And it's meant to remove traditional barriers, barriers of copyright, have other barriers, financial, geographic, learning needs, including disability. And we are really seeing that OER helps materials be available to learners and educators after a course is over, and to be able to address their own teaching and learning needs and schedules. So that's really, part of the equitable piece. Access is more than the ability to get materials and use them, find them online. It's also to address the need for adaptability and flexibility. That OER allows materials to be updated, to remain relevant, and flexibility allows educators to personalize material, and particularly to address accessibility issues with students with disabilities or their own learning preferences. So this is really a key piece of why OER has been such an important change agent in education. We also see that educators, when there's OER, there's more engagement. Educators are taking more ownership and agency and investment around curriculum, and being able to personalize is a big change in their own professionalism. For professional learning, we see that OER empowers instructors as professionals. They're able to develop and adapt and curate their own material. They are the ones that know their students best and their communities best, and OER provides them with the opportunity to use their professional judgment on how to tailor resources to students' needs. And zooming out, there's long-term savings for OER, not only the removing the need to buy textbooks continually and other proprietary material. In the long term, with investment, state and local agencies, including districts and universities, community colleges, can all support sustainability of digital equity more broadly by investing in their educators and the infrastructure and research that OER deserves. So it's really a system-wide change to go to OER. Reg?
Great, thanks, Amy. So we want to talk a little bit about not only some policy ideas today, but also try to provide some thoughts about how to develop an OER strategy for your state, connected specifically to this digital equity work underway nationally. Go Open has developed a very useful toolkit and letter that is available at goopen.us that I'll post, that also talks about this work and opportunities to take advantage of it. But obviously the biggest part of developing a thoughtful strategy in your state is really first understanding the OER landscape, of course, what materials are already being used and how, and to kind of judge the ripeness of this work across your state, but really also understanding it in the context of how your jurisdiction has elected to execute this digital equity planning process that's underway. I would say on that point, your governor was responsible for tapping the leaders in your state that essentially formed a committee for writing this plan. Because it's a broadband infrastructure focused plan, a lot of those folks are telecommunications leaders, telecommunications policy experts that might not have expertise in education or digital learning, but the law requires these panels to be engaged with the education community. We know in some jurisdictions they've had a tough time doing that, finding the right people and with the right energy to really have these conversations. And the U.S. Department of Education has tried to be supportive of the effort by writing about also about how to engage with these planning committees across the state. But the first thing is really just to know those people, where they are in the process, how close they are to publishing the draft plan for review. And they are eager, right, to find education voices to contribute to this process. Second big piece, obviously, it's got to be a very collaborative effort. And I think we really strongly recommend engagement with stakeholders across the leadership spectrum in education, beginning with the state education agency, including obviously school districts and higher education leaders, but also, you know, educators and students as well. So that voice is represented in this process, and really bringing together those stakeholders to collect feedback from them about how OER can be a lever in your state, connected to the digital access that these funds are meant to expand, and then really thinking about how to prioritize, you know, funding and actions through these plans that can encourage the use of OER and open licensing, right, as a powerful kind of lever. So We're going to talk more about each of those kind of ideas in a few minutes, but I'm now going to just pass the mic back to Amy to talk with us about what this can look like based on what's already happening in a few example states.
Thanks, Reg. We have been working with states, both the Go Open Network and in my work at ISKME, with many states that are taking the lead around OER already for quite a number of years. And we're just going to mention a few to highlight maybe some of the ways that they have really been taking the lead in the K-12 space. There's been more policy action and more funding and more system-wide change around OER in higher ed. And in the K-12 landscape, that really has been lagging behind. But there are many states that are taking the lead to include K-12 OER and to support educators in using them. Michigan is one that has a state-developed website with many resources, and they have a unique grant program that districts can apply and want to create materials that they also receive mentoring from other districts that are leading the way. So that's really been a great effort. In Virginia, they also have a state-developed website. They have hubs that support educators, and they were really instrumental in a rapid COVID response and putting out resources at the beginning of the pandemic. And they continue to have curating materials for educators across the state. Likewise, North Carolina started doing a very comprehensive teacher professional development program a number of years ago, and they really do support educators to integrate OER across the curriculum. Georgia has its own system that is very extensive, Georgia Virtual Learning, courses from the state level aligned to standards, and has very complex and comprehensive ecosystem for OER. We'll look at a few more. Connecticut, we've been working with Connecticut around digital equity specifically. They have also their own statewide hub that's higher ed and K-12 OER together. And they really have been supporting digital equity and the infrastructure work that Reg has been talking about today. US Virgin Islands has an OER site and professional development, and kind of unique in curating and creating culturally responsive materials that are particular to the Virgin Islands. Oregon, for instance, has been concentrating on quality, having developed their own quality framework. They're working extensively around accessibility to do professional learning around accessibility and have their own hub. Washington has had an OER hub for quite some time, has really been an early supporter of OER all these years, and districts come in with, based on their own needs and local control to use and create materials and share them out. And they had been instrumental in, for instance, the social studies area to include Indigenous perspectives in the curriculum. So that's just highlighting some of the great work that's being done across the country in OER and K-12. I'll just give you a little bit more about Go Open if you're not familiar. Go Open has been an initiative that started by the Department of Ed. It was a federal initiative in 2015, and through 2021, it brought states and districts into the OER movement and supported their membership and awareness and advancement of OER. And then in early 2022, when the federal, the Office of Ed Tech stepped away from running it as a federal initiative, they passed the baton to ISKME and a group of us to continue to grow OER in the K-12 landscape. And we've been working over the last year or so to canvass the membership, find out what current membership had really wanted. And the results of a survey last summer was about creating a shared space for us to share resources, to collaborate, to have discussions, and as a headquarters for a lot of the other communications and social media and webinars that we've been doing. We've been also doing this policy action around digital equity and launched that last fall with Reg and his group Foresight. And we've really been advocating and working with states around getting the word out that OER deserves to be part of a solution for digital equity. So we overall, we have a hub for getting together, and anyone is now allowed to join. It's not just an official state and district membership model, but any individual educator that would like to join Go Open can just go to this hub and join the member group, and then you become a member. I'll put that link in the chat. And we really support OER as a tool of empowerment for educators. And we've been running monthly webinars in different professional learning topics to support educators in their OER work. And we're open to any suggestions for future topics. We have an open survey right now, or if you just want to reach us for topics that you might have questions on or want to advance your skills, because we really feel that through Go Open, we can raise the professionalism in the K-12 space around OER and the leadership model, including for school librarians and others that may have been marginalized in this work. We really want to, across roles, build a professionalism in the space. So that's enough for that slide, and I'll give it back to you, Reg.
Perfect. So we want to talk a little bit now about some of the policy ideas that we want the field to think about in the context of this work. So, obviously with the federal investment in the infrastructure, which is something north of $42 billion, we want to make sure that every American can take advantage of these connections. And as I said at the beginning, Congress recognized that it's not always about having access to high-speed connection, right? In some cases, the user might not understand how to take advantage of it. They might not see the value in it. It might be cost, but there are kind of monthly subsidies out there that are meant to help low-income communities. But on the adoption side, a big part of boosting adoption rates is showing value to the individual user. And so really helping the telecommunications policy leaders thinking about these digital equity plans to thoughtfully integrate digital learning into the plans can be an amazing adoption strategy. And the first thing we really want to talk about is is just the importance of kind of building into these plans and into state policy generally, ideas for really encouraging OER adoption by districts and schools, including through incentives for them to use open resources as their primary resources for instructional materials. And that can be through, helpful guidance. It can be by providing resources to them to support the work. It can be about professional development opportunities to really help educators successfully use and integrate OER into their curriculum. And that strategy, we think, is a powerful strategy for adoption of and use of these new high-speed broadband networks that will be built out to a lot of communities over the next few years. Second, we think, right, there's kind of a proven model around developing statewide OER repositories as a mechanism for promoting OER in a policy and centralizing access, right, making it easy for educators to access high quality open license materials is something we know works in other contexts, and then really again allocating resources to not only create those repositories, but obviously they have to be maintained and kept fresh to ensure quality and all of the really heavy lifting that goes into ensuring that a repository is current and valuable over time, aligned to state standards, obviously, in the work and assessment and other big policy areas in the K-12 space in particular. And then ensuring, right, access is available to students and families across the state. And so what we see in the digital equity planning space is really maybe not all of the minutia of this work, but really setting a foundation and sending signals to communities about this opportunity in the context of that work. So really just trying to build in even some of these ideas into the plan can be a helpful first step. I just mentioned it. Amy's talked a little bit about it in her remarks as well. Obviously it's not enough to just try to create these resources and make them available. We've really got to be strongly supportive of our educators in using them and in sustaining that work over time. And so allocating, federal, state, and local professional development resources for OER adoption and effective use of the materials in the classroom is an important strategy. That might be, kind of locally led effort around local dollars, but could also be around communicating with state leaders about how to use even the SEA share of the federal Title II investment in professional development, or programs like the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Block Grant that include a technology-focused professional development effort. That's a couple $2 billion a year that Congress approves alongside the Title II PD investment. And the idea, again, really trying to provide more opportunities for our teachers to learn about OER, collaborate with peers to develop strategies around use and development of the resources, and really offering incentives even or in stipends and research certification credits around participating in OER PD, right, to build traction and awareness among educators about the advantages that Amy talked about earlier in the presentation. Second, like supporting OER creation, right, investing in the development, including through incentives for educators to create and adapt their own OER, and providing grants and other funding to support, this work in a systematic way that's aligned to state standards and assessment. So next, we really, again, kind of the same strategy we talked a little bit about in the context of the digital equity planning process. Really important to be fostering partnerships and collaborations in this OER policy work, including among school districts and higher education leaders and education organizations that can be really powerful allies in this space, associations of educators and school leaders and school district leaders, and facilitating opportunities for those stakeholders to come together, that might be virtually or in person, to really share best practice around the development and use of open educational resources. That might be sharing really creative ideas about how to blend and braid local, state, and federal funding around this work. But again, what are those spaces in your state that provide a platform for these kinds of opportunities to work together? And if they don't exist, how could you as an individual leader really begin to provide an opportunity, maybe in partnership with your school or your higher ed institution or your school district, in trying to network farther into your communities and states in this work? Fourth, really thinking about how to build OER into procurement policies. Obviously, this becomes a much more kind of sophisticated policy conversation, procurement law. A lot of us might immediately kind of glaze over when we think about all of the requirements that go into acquiring resources, but it's just absolutely essential to supporting and promoting OER in the state, and being very clear about the advantages of building open concepts in both district and state procurement policies can be very, very advantageous. And even in thinking about what, evaluation criteria a state uses around curriculum, and including and ensuring that openly licensed is, at a minimum, something that should be considered in those policies. And then lastly, on the OER kind of policy ideas, many of you may have been champions for open for many years. You might be new to it, but I think we would all agree that there are a lot of people, a lot of education stakeholders who may not know what OER are. They may not understand the advantages that Amy has talked about. They may not even know about work that might already be underway in their community and state. So really being a voice in your sphere for building awareness about open educational resources generally as an education policy tool to help support student learning, but also building awareness of how open can be connected to this important digital equity work that is underway in every state. That is, how do we be a voice for connecting the dots between high quality, open digital content as a mechanism for promoting adoption of broadband, and these kind of plans that might have a tendency to lean towards the minutia and technical nature of broadband networks themselves. So really being that bridge between the content that they will carry that will make a difference for teachers and students and families, and the networks themselves. And as kind of educators can be a powerful voice for helping people understand that. And that's, using websites, obviously, newsletters that you might already be aware of that go out to the community and that are read, using social media, obviously, workshops, all of those things to really raise awareness of this work. With those kind of policy ideas in mind, we just want to, again, kind of reiterate what we said up front. You can find out who the leaders are that are responsible for your digital equity plan on the National Telecommunications and Information Administration's website, NTIA for short. I know there's a link in the chat to their website and to this digital equity planning process, but it's all very visible on their site. They have a 50-state map where you can find out who's leading this work. And we want to really, I think, try to kind of, even as we're midway through 2023, reach out to those people that are leading these plans. And again, tell this story, use the Go Open network materials, use the work you're doing as an example. And also, as those plans are published for public comment, which is an NTIA requirement, using that mechanism also to provide feedback on the plan. If they're completely missing OER, recommend including it, helping them understand the relevancy of it. And then Amy, I don't know if you want to kind of mention Maine's plan as an example, but there, as we see some of the draft plans coming out, they don't always reference OER directly, but there are kind of entry points. So let you talk about that for a second.
Great. What we're seeing is that there is some real motivation in certain states, including, for instance, in Maine, that this opportunity to improve access to the infrastructure really has other implications. That with with better boxes and wires and the high-speed access, the underserved, marginalized communities, low-income families, diverse households are going to be able to offer students a better way to engage online. And it's not just in the case of the pandemic, but there has to be 24/7 access to teaching and learning. And that's what we're seeing with communities that have been able to invest in digital skills and devices to really be able to take advantage of educational opportunities, K-12, K-20, lifelong learning. This is where we're seeing that, from our perspective, OER and digital equity really come together. And we can certainly talk about the strategies that Reg mentioned. Really exciting to be able to be involved in a policy action where these suggested policies can be part of the current plans that states are doing to take advantage of federal funding that's going to go directly to states and support, we hope, support teaching and learning across the board, not just in formal settings, but in informal settings. Access to civic engagement, access to any underserved communities to be able to do continuous learning, lifelong learning. So I did put a link to the Go Open guidance. And if you're not familiar with that, I'd encourage reading through it, because it outlines not only the advantages of OER, that you can build your own arguments to state leaders in your state around digital equity planning. But there's also some examples, some recommendations and some suggestions for what the work might look like on the ground. To start with educator leadership, you can do a small pilot with interested teachers that may want to use OER as a strategy to promote digital equity. And they may start curating or creating materials and using it and testing it in the classroom and see what the advantages are, and start to build a more system-wide, on the ground use of OER in step-by-step small ways. So there's lots of ways to get started in this work. And it's exciting to see that states are starting to talk about these things in their plans.
I see a couple questions in the chat that is perfectly timed as we kind of transition to the Q&A segment of the presentation. The first is, are there any federal funding opportunities that states and districts can apply for? So specifically connected to this digital equity work that was funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law, the first funding opportunity I would call your attention to is the Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program that NTIA will be responsible for administering. They have not announced when they will issue a public notice inviting applications, but they did a couple of months ago invite the public to provide comment about how the competitive grants should be structured. So they've already taken that procedural step. Our sense is that they may allow states to first submit their digital equity plans and get them approved before they open up this competitive grant competition. But we'd encourage you to keep close watch on the NTIA website and on the Go Open newsletter, for example, will cover this when it's published. But NTIA will, at some point, probably later this year, I guess it could spill over into 2024, open this digital equity competitive grant program, and that will be available to school districts and state education agencies. Second, each year, Congress approves money authorized by the Elementary and Secondary Education Act for a program that you might know as Title IV, also known as the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Block Grant. It's not just about open or just about digital learning, but it includes sub-references to openly licensed materials. But more importantly, it has a very big focus on professional development around digital learning. And I think that Student Support and Academic Enrichment Block Grant, if you're a school district that receives some of that funding by formula, that's a good use of the funds for open initiatives. And then lastly, if you're a higher education listener to this event, there is the open textbook program that Congress has funded for a few years. It's not a huge amount of money, but I think it's had a powerful impact. And when those competitions open up, they'll be seeking typically 2 to 3 new winners through that process on the higher ed side too.
Great. I also see Dan posted a question. How do we get state officials to understand that OER benefits? There are OER benefits that extend beyond state borders. Great concept. I don't know if you were thinking anything in particular, Dan, but the Go Open Network as a national platform to advocate and advance OER is, thinking beyond state borders. And the campaign that's so much of this work is supported by the Hewlett Foundation, and they have done research and supporting a campaign to advocate that knowledge is meant to be shared is the main message. And that's where OER fits in. It's not just meant to create OER and keep it in a closet. It's really meant to help those that don't want to start from scratch, that OER can be adapted from one state to another. We can leverage each other's work, and we can help educators in any place to get started by access to materials that have been created in one state and can be aligned, for instance, to standards in another state, with not too much difficulty. And there are many national organizations that bring state leadership together, like CETA and others that are thinking about benefits nationally. So I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that, or if that's what you were thinking, Dan. Happy to entertain other questions.
I'd like to also add that to reach legislators or other state officials in your states and advocate for OER, SREB has started state OER action teams to do just that. And they're led by leaders in education departments in the 16 states, member states of SREB. And those leaders sit on our Education Technology Cooperative. And if you're interested in joining, they will meet roughly quarterly. And I put the link in the chat where you can just go and you can sign up online, and someone from that state will contact you for the next meeting. if you're interested.
That's terrific, Charlotte. Thank you. We know that in the higher ed space, a lot of OER advocates can be found amongst OER academic librarians and librarians across the board. And we certainly hope that that level of awareness and skill can extend to the K-12 space, that K-12 librarians can be brought into the conversation and gain professional skills in OER curation and adaptation. So there's lots of room for the upskilling of educators. Let's see, are there any other questions out there? Meanwhile, I'll say that ISKME, my team, is certainly available for more information and connections that you may want to make around OER if you want to find these state level sites where OER is made available. And we are partners with CAST, both in the OER work and in the Go Open work, to make sure that OER meets the demands of accessibility for students with disabilities and learning preferences across the country and across the world. So we're really all very passionate about making that commitment to accessibility, and have brought it into the Go Open original commitment was to add accessibility. It's often talked about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion for OER. We made it DEIA in our founding documents so that accessibility is always a part of the equitable education conversation. There's a few links here. I had put them in the chat already to find the Go Open Hub on OER Commons. OER Commons is ISKME's public library of digital materials that are free and openly licensed. And the Go Open Hub and many other hubs are unique pages within the Commons where materials are collected and offered out. And at the hub, you can also not only join Go Open, but then see announcements for when we have new materials, when we have our monthly webinars. You can sign up for the newsletter, and you can certainly find us in social media. We're active on Twitter and on LinkedIn. And for LinkedIn, we encourage having the deeper conversations around policy actions and OER benefits. So you're certainly welcome to find us there and to email us at info@goopen.us. So really excited to be able to share this time with you today.
Thank you, Amy and Reg, and thank you all for attending. Are there any final words? Well, I trust that we've answered your questions satisfactorily.
I see a raised hand.
Oh, okay, Gwendolyn, Emily. Okay, please put your questions in the chat if you have any, or you're just saying goodbye. I believe they're saying goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.